This is NDTV, and you're watching Classics.
Salman Rushdie, thank you so much for talking to Star News.
Pleasure.
What does it feel like to be back in India after 12 years?
Well, it feels pretty enormous, really. I mean, it's a very big feeling, and I knew it would be. I mean, when I knew I was coming, I thought to myself, I don't know what it's going to be like, good or bad, but I know that it's going to be a very large experience, and so it's proved. Actually, it's been almost entirely a terrific experience, but particularly because I was able to bring my older son with me, who's now just Zafar, who's about to be 21, and he was very keen to come, and so I actually arranged the whole trip around him. It started out as being a trip to come to the Commonwealth Prize dinner, but it ended up as a kind of little father and son road movie, But the point was to try and somehow get in quietly, because I knew that if you gentlemen, had found out I was here, then we wouldn't have been able to have our private little experience.
Right.
So I was actually able to get in about 8 days ago, and to spend the first week just quietly showing him around, and actually in many cases showing myself around again, because there are a lot of these places I haven't been to for a long time. I mean,
You managed to slip in pretty unnoticed, as you
Yes.
said. And what does that have to do with the shrewdness of being an invisible man for
well,
so
I
long?
think I certainly am not going to reveal the tricks. The conjurer never reveals the trick, but there are certain little tricks. It requires a bit of help, and I must say the security forces here have been fantastically helpful and very flexible at helping us to have this private time. And so yeah, we spent a couple of days in Delhi. I showed him around here, and then we went to Jaipur, and then to Fatehpur, Agra, and then went up to stay in my old family cottage in Solan, which for me really was an incredibly moving time, because my father's no longer alive, but he had gifted this cottage to me on my 21st birthday, and then I was taking my son to it just as he's approaching his 21st birthday, and it felt like I was completing some promise to my father, because in the meanwhile this house had been pinched by the Himachal authorities, and we had to fight a long legal battle to get it back. So finally to have it back in the family and to be able to go and spend some nights there was really deeply moving for me.
And India's changed so much in these 12 years. What are the biggest changes you perceive?
Well, I mean, there are the obvious things. There's the big technological change, and alongside that, the enormous expansion of the urban middle class and its much greater wealth and prosperity. There's evidence of much more money around, than there used to be, and of course there's the political change. There's the shift of relative party strength, to the emergence of a new government, the decay, if you like, of the old establishment. That's just something I've been trying to keep my ears and eyes open and absorb as much as I can, because that is, of course, what I've been trying to keep in touch from abroad, and so I'm not saying that I had to start from ground zero, but it's been very interesting to be here to study that big shift in the political structure of the country. But I also find that beneath that, there's a lot of India that is just the same as it ever was.
Mm-hmm.
People are the same as they ever were, and if you like, the mess is the same. It's the same mess, And I do sometimes wish that while everybody is patting themselves on the back for having turned themselves into this great, third millennium nation, they would remember how much remains undone. And one of the things about traveling around the countryside is that you immediately see how nothing really has trickled down to the mass of the people, and the same old things need doing. I mean, there's still no drinking water that you can drink, and there are all kinds of basic amenities of health and education and so on which are strongly lacking, and if you really want to be a country that competes with the United States as one of the world's great democracies, it can't only be limited to the success of the middle class. You actually have to provide a better country for the whole nation, and I think
particularly the underclass.
Particularly the poorest and most disadvantaged in the country, and there's no evidence that that's changed at all. And so, one of the things, if you come from Bombay particularly, is you're always very aware of what in Bombay is called the hovel and high-rise culture, where there's this incredible contrast between the lives that are lived in the sky and the lives that are lived in the gutter, and the physical shape of Bombay, dramatizes that. But I think it's really true everywhere now that the extremes between the great wealth and the great poverty of India are wider than I remember them being, and that can't be good. I mean, that's a recipe for all kinds of resentments and unrest. And so I think this great wealth-creating class, I think in its own interest, needs to understand that wealth does have to be transferred to the mass of the people, and that people do need to have food to eat and water to drink, clean water to drink, and schools for their children and medicines when they're ill, and so on. These sort of simple welfare issues, which I don't see anybody addressing really, and which seem to me to be much more important than the atomic bomb.
You're writing a piece on this visit, about this particular visit. Is it going to contain this as an underlying theme?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just writing a memoir of what happened to me, in this rather intense, short time at the end of this very long exile. So I guess it is just a kind of exile's return piece. But I mean, have always tried to be a cultural commentator as well as just a fiction writer, and so. Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to write about what I saw and what it made me think, and offer it to people to see whether it's interesting to them. But I mean, it's the motivation for writing the piece is that I knew that this was going to be a very emotional return for me, and so it's proved to be, and so the start of the piece is that just very personal story of coming back after all this time and bringing my son and so on and so on, and then. But I think as well as looking inwards, you always have to look outwards as well. I mean, that's also part of the job. So I hope in the piece I'll try and balance both those things.
Your period of exile really started in February 1989 when Ayatollah Khomeini issued that fatwa against you. Looking back now, do you remember what your immediate reaction was?
I locked the front door. And shut the shutters. No, because I mean clearly the power of Khomeini was very great, and I was under no illusion that meant that there was serious physical danger. For the first time, and I remember that this happened many months after the novel was published. The book had been published 6 months earlier, and although there had been dispute and controversy and discussion and so on, there'd never been any physical danger, and I'd never certainly felt any, and I was. Doing a lot of debating and arguing with various people who thought this or that, but it never struck me that was in any way endangering me. And in many ways, I thought it was actually quite valuable, because I think one of the things that literature does for a society is to say the unsayable, to ask difficult questions rather than easy ones, to propose things that things might be thus rather than thus, how would the world be if we thought of it like this? Those are the questions that art asks of us. And of course, sometimes those questions elicit very strong responses. And you have that argument. If a book generates an argument, if it's what we call controversial, that can be a very good thing. That out of that controversy, we understand each other a bit better. We air our differences, if you like, and then we move on to the next thing. That's, it seems to me, one of the important functions that works of art can perform in a society. And actually, that is what was happening until the fatwa. And oddly, the fatwa silenced that conversation, because then there became another conversation, which was about life and death and terrorism and, security and so on. I mean, much less interesting things, actually. And frankly, apart from the fact that the fatwa was a sort of an attempt to murder somebody, it's a completely banal event. And what does it say? All it says is shut up. And if you don't shut up, we'll kill you. Oh, actually, we'll kill you anyway. And that was a dull conversation. But before that, there had been quite a rich conversation beginning, in which many people were strongly disagreeing with my points of view, and that's fine.
It was a point of debate.
Exactly. And I felt, in a way, that the kind of debate that the Satanic Verses might have stimulated, and might then have just run its natural course and been left alone, was in a way interrupted by the Iranian fatwa, and that's one of the disservices, one of the many disservices that political act did.
And how would you say it changed you as a person, indeed as a writer?
Well, as a writer, it's easier to say. I mean, as a writer, because I think any profound experience, you know, if you're any kind of writer at all, then you do look at it very seriously and you try and learn from it. And I think also if you're somebody who by nature is a comic writer and a satirical writer, etc., then in many cases writers like that find it very easy to know what they're against. You know, much satire is by identifying what your targets are. You know, and yet what I understood very early in this is that I needed to understand what I was for. It's like that if we are going to fight this fight, then you have to understand not just what you're fighting against, because that's rather easy. You know, if somebody's trying to send terrorists after you, it's rather easy to know what you're against. But you also have to know what is it that you're upholding, what is it that you're fighting for. And that was something that I thought a great deal about in these years, and I think did give me a much better understanding of the kind of values on which the art of literature is based, on which my own life, I hope, is based. You know, values of the imagination, of truth-telling, of, if you like, certain kind of artistic fearlessness, of dedication. It's very odd. I mean, if you'd asked me 12 years ago if there was anything that I'd be willing to die for, I'd have looked at you as if you were mad, you know, because why would one, you know? And yet here were people trying to kill me, and I discovered that actually I cared about the thing that was being endangered, you know, enough to wish to fight for it, even though, you know, it placed my life in danger. And that was a very interesting thing to discover about yourself, that you feel that strongly about something. And so, yes, I mean, I think I learned a lot.
And did you have to sort of battle your own fear?
Yeah, well, I mean,
things like that come
people ask me that a lot, and the truth is, I wasn't very conscious of fear. I was conscious of bewilderment, confusion, disorientation, you know, in the beginning, sort of not really knowing how to think about things and what was for the best, and, you know, how to act in a right way, or, you know, etc. That I remember a great deal, and I had to sort of stumble my way through that, you know, until I could understand better how to fight back against what had happened to me. But not exactly fear, you know. It was these other things, and I think it's because fear gets in the way in the end. I mean, you can't think, you know. And I remember reading the accounts given by many other people who'd been in extreme circumstances, you know, the Lebanon hostages, for example, and many of them said the same thing, that you know, you were too busy trying to find ways to deal with what was happening to you. You know,
day to day.
Day to day, yes. Survival, you know, and to keep your selfhood, you know, and to go on being a person. That became the issue, and fear, in some odd way, wasn't relevant. You know, it was just something over there in the corner, you know, that you did. And I must say, I think the same thing.